Especially in times of fake news, we rely on those collecting facts and reliable numbers. This is why we are proud that the Bertelsmann Stiftung conducted a survey about the relations between Europe and Israel, especially for our summit, and will present the results now. We are also honored to have Dina Porat, who will present her recent research. Mike Lingenfelser, who is a German journalist and the correspondent of IRD, Israel, and the Palestinian authorities, will be hosting this panel. Mike, you once said that you love the word yalla in Hebrew and Arabic. So, yalla, Mike, we're eager to listen to your panel. This panel. Mike, you once said that you love the word yalla in Hebrew and Arabic. So, yalla, Mike, we're eager to listen to your panel. This panel. Mike, you once said yalla.
יאללה, ותודה לך, ג'ני, וברוכים הבאים. Welcome, dear viewers out there. Welcome to this panel on insights into mutual perceptions between Israelis and Europeans, and also new findings in worrying anti-Semitism. It's my honor to introduce you to two proven experts on this matter, Professor Dina Porat of Tel Aviv University and Dr. Joachim Rother of the Bertelsmann Stiftung, the Bertelsmann Foundation. While Joachim will present us a new study, an exclusive study on how Europeans and Israelis look upon each other, how much interested they are in each other. Dina Porat looked and addressed the question whether the COVID-19 pandemic has an impact, of course, not only on our daily life these days, but also on the phenomena of anti-Semitism. So let's start with Professor Dina Porat, who is the head of Kantor Center for Contemporary Studies of Contemporary Jewry, and also the chief historian of Yad Vashem for 10 years already, and of course, worth mentioning, rewarded publisher, the National Jewish Book Award she was awarded with, for example, and also your new book, Dina, about the revenge of Jews after World War II has been rewarded with the Bahat Prize. Mm-hmm. Dina, now we know who to talk to, but what to talk about is very interesting, because your findings, to me, they are kind of worrying, or pretty worrying, if not shocking, when you looked at the COVID-19 pandemic and looked at anti-Semitism that you observe for a long time already in an international network. You found something new. What is it?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you, all the organizers, for having invited me. Thank you, Joachim, my partner, to this panel. The matter is as follows. In the Kantor Center, or in Tel Aviv University, we are a team that has been monitoring and analyzing the situation of anti-Semitism for more than 25 years now. So we did our regular job comparing 2019 to 2018, finding that violent cases went up 20%, which happened before, but then came February. We always publish findings in April, a day before Holocaust Memorial Day. But then came February 2020, when the coronavirus began its travel around the world. And we started seeing, along the month of March, in the beginning, that there is something a bit different than we've been monitoring regularly. And the difference was that along March, April, May, June, the materials that we have been getting from the world at large. We have a net of some 60 partners, dear friends and colleagues who keep sending us material, but from other sources, of course, as well. What we kept seeing is that an accusation that the Jews and the Israelis, as individuals and as communities, are basically responsible for inventing the virus, for orchestrating it, and for spreading it around. And this accusation also had its logic. Why should they do so? They should do so, or they are doing so, because they have what you call a Jewish cop, a Jewish head, or an Israeli head, we are 80% Jews, that will certainly find the vaccination or the medicine against the virus. And they will find it first. We will find it first. And so you infected the whole world. You found the vaccine and the vaccination and the medicine, and then you can sell it to the whole world, the whole sick world, at an enormous price, an enormous profit. Now, moreover, not only was this accusation catching up like this, at the beginning, it came from extreme fringes, such as white supremacists in the United States, ultra-conservative Christians, the countries that are always doing so, like Iran, Turkey, okay, that's natural. But then what we realized was that it is coming from segments of society that are not necessarily ideologically or class-wise identified. There is a survey by Oxford University, an excellent one, that says 20% of regular population believes that Jews are really responsible. So it was coming from all over. We got material from 35 countries. It was coming from segments and layers of society that you wouldn't expect, the general one. And it was intense, and it still is. It is intense, and it is, let's say, fierce in its ugliness. It is ugly. Can you show, please, a cartoon that shows very Jewish, supposedly Jewish faces that look like the virus or advance the virus, okay? Could you show that?
Yeah, it's on. We see it. We see it.
Okay. So you can, all those who are listening can see it. It's a known image of the Jew since medieval time, der Stürmer, but it is now connected to the virus in a way that says more or less that it's not only that the Jew brings the virus, but he is physically, not symbolically, he physically is the virus. There was one more new element, not only from all over, not only ugly, not only intense, it was connected to the Holocaust in many ways. And we asked ourselves, I certainly, as a Yad Vashem person for such a long time, since the 80s, why is it connected to the Holocaust? What does it have to do with it? But it has to do with it because the coronavirus rose so much fear, so much anxiety among people, that all the prejudices and the deep, dark feelings came out. When you say that the Jews are, let's say, masters of the banks, world banking companies, or the media, or Hollywood, okay, this doesn't kill you. It's bad, but it doesn't kill you. The coronavirus does kill you. It arises fear and anxieties countries are closing themselves, borders are closed. Whoever is a foreigner is a suspect, including foreigners that have been there hundreds of years, like the Jews or others. And so, out of the fear, you think of a comparison to the worst you can imagine. And what is the worst you can imagine? The Holocaust, which was the worst case, historical case and event during the 20th century and until today, and hopefully forever. And so there are new expressions, for instance, that connect the Holocaust to the virus, such as Holocaust and coughing, okay? It's like you cough, or Jews cough, and it spreads, and it's terrible, and it takes sacrifices in human lives, like the Holocaust. Or really a plaque that was shown in a demonstration in Philadelphia, for instance, which said synagogues are closed. Synagogues were closed because of the corona. Gas chambers are open, which means you know where to go. This is, I think, the utmost. But there were also other insinuations about the Holocaust, because people felt that the way the Nazis closed Jews in the ghetto, now people are being closed by authorities and state regulations that you don't believe in and you don't want to obey. There were demonstrations where people had the yellow star. Could you show it, please? The yellow star, and inside it said, instead of Jude on the yellow star, it said unvaccinated. Can you see that? Is it being shown?
Yes, we are on.
Okay, thank you. Why unvaccinated? Because there is a movement that began, of course, before the virus, but there is a movement not to be vaccinated, not to vaccinate your children. And what do they say? We are being persecuted because we don't vaccinate, much as the Jews were persecuted during the Holocaust. So the Holocaust is here. There are other cartoons showing the famous entrance to Auschwitz. And at the entrance, there are two people holding an injection. You will come in or you will get out only if you're vaccinated. So the whole story of life, of being healthy, of belonging to being persecuted for your opinions, and basically the fear and anxiety gave way to expressions and terms that are related to the Holocaust. So our first question was, what is different? And the answer was the intensity, the ugliness, the amount of material, and the connection to the Holocaust. But then we also asked ourselves, why did it catch up so easily? Why did this accusation that has nothing to do with reality? Anti-Semitism is not about reality. The essence of anti-Semitism is the discrepancy between what the Jew really is and what the anti-Semite thinks about him, of course. But still, why did this illogical accusation, look at Israel, we are sick with the corona, and our economy was so severely hurt. Why this accusation? I think that it has to do, as a historian, I think that it has to do with some historical layers in history that created the image of the Jew as a malady spreader. It began in Egypt in the first century where a story contrary to our story of the Exodus out of Egypt was written, and it said that the Jews or the tribes of Israel were chased away from Egypt because they were lepers, because they spread leprosy, which was then a malady with no cure, no cure, until the penicillin came so much later. And then you had in the Middle Ages, you had the Black Plague in the middle of the Middle Ages, the Black Plague, during which the Jews were accused of poisoning the wells. And such an accusation came back. Could you please show us a cartoon showing a lady who used to be, she's not anymore, the French Minister of Health. She's a Jew, Agnes Goin, and look at her, she's happily dripping poison into a well, which brings back this Middle Ages accusation, play modern, but exactly as it was. Then
so
came
old models that were out there for ages are being recycled?
Yes, look at her. She's poisoning a well. She's not even poisoning, let's say, a water system, something modern. She's poisoning a well, like in the Middle Ages. Then came the Nazis, who were obsessed with fear from Jews who spread maladies, who are lice and mice and typhoid, etc., etc. They were obsessed with fear, and their propaganda tried to persuade all of the population in Europe under the boot that these are the Jews. The Jews are, again, not symbolically, but physically are the malady. This explains to you also a bit the Holocaust. Why should you kill and why should you burn? You burn so that you don't touch, because they spread maladies. And the doctor's famous trial during Stalin times. So a long history, layers of this image have accumulated and created an image of the Jew who spread maladies. Even if you have not read anything about Egypt in the first century writings, but the image is there. The image is there. And so it caught up like this. And I think this is the explanation to why it caught up so extensively and so widely.
And where did you find those images? I mean, obviously, the Star of David was seen in public, for example, at a demonstration. I think your example is from Munich.
That's right.
But also our foreign minister, Heiko Maas, who spoke right before us, he also mentioned this example, but he saw it in Berlin in the latest demonstration of right-wingers and Nazis and freaks.
Yes.
So this was, if you will, it was out there in public, but of course you found so many examples and skyrocketing increase. Mm-hmm. What is the baseline? Did you check any online source you could get publicly? What's the baseline of your study that goes into dozens of countries?
Yeah. You know, Mike, when our panel is over, when the conference is over and you have a bit of time, please Google up and write in Google cartoons related to Corona-inspired anti-Semitism. You will get a few hundreds, not one or two in demonstrations. Sorry, you will get them by the hundreds. And they are being spread mainly not in demonstrations, but online in the social media nets, the open ones like Facebook, Twitter. Of course, we are asking them to take it off as much as you can. But there is also under the open media social nets, there is a dark net. The dark net that is much more difficult to follow and to monitor has sites in which extremist groups have their company, belong to each other, build their relationship, create a propaganda, and it is from there that much of this material is going out. You know, the problem is the quick manner in which whatever you put on the social media is in all the world, all over the world, and millions of people watch it. So when you have a decent newspaper reporting about this and showing a caricature, you give them a platform too. You don't agree with them, but you give the platform, and the cartoons are being seen and the accusation is being heard.
You as an historian, when you found and have been finding all these examples, did you also find counter examples? Like a counter example to this old image of Jews and poisoning a well, but we know that Jewish people did in history a lot of opposite examples, being doctors or being scientists, helping people.
You know what? Yeah, thank you for the question. First of all, we found out that others were accused as well. Chinese, Muslims, Bill Gates, fifth generation cellular antennas, etc. There are many culprits, not only Jews. But when you look at history, Jews were indeed very much into the profession of medicine. Many of the great doctors were Jews. And I would like to say to all of those who think that Jews and Israelis did this, if they didn't, did this in order to have an enormous profit, I would like to tell them that there were two doctors, Salvin and Savin and Salk, who in the 1950s found the vaccination and the medicine against polio that was paralyzing children in the beginning of the 50s. They, both of them Jews, they found it, they gave it for free, of course. They refused to have it on the name. They refused to have 1 penny earned by them from that. They said it belongs to the children of the world. So, of course, you have other examples, but these are examples that we found, not that others, I think, brought up.
Great example.
Yes.
Thank you so much. If you agree, let's take Dr. Joachim Rother into the conversation again, who has quite interesting findings that are linked to our topic, of course, because it's always about relations between people or non-existent relations between people. So Joachim Rother, a quick introduction also to you. It's great to have you here from the Bertelsmann Stiftung, a well and old established foundation in Germany. And Joachim also spent time in Israel a couple of years as the deputy head of another foundation, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and was a deputy in the Jerusalem office back then. So you have a strong connection to Israel, and now you're managing the Israel portfolio of the Bertelsmann Stiftung, and your key pillar is the German-Israeli Young Leaders Exchange Program. I know it well because I have the honor to be an alumni of it. It was before your time, but I always remember that the Stiftung, as it's called here in Israel, just the Stiftung, and some people know exactly what we are talking about. Okay, but Joachim, now you did something very of very much current interest. You looked upon how do Europeans, including Germans, of course, look towards the Israelis and vice versa. What are our relations, at least what the interviews the interviewees of these 8 countries that you asked are saying or thinking and told you. So Joachim, please go ahead, tell us what's the news.
Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you to Dina for this very interesting first half of the talk. And thank you, obviously, to the hosts as well for having us. Yeah, thank you so much. What we did is actually that we conducted a survey, as you said, Mike, among Europeans and Israelis. And the aim of our study was actually to shed light on how the participating citizens of Europe and Israel perceive each other. A little caveat, though, the study is not a complete analysis of our mutual relations, but is instead shedding light on selected singular aspects, and is therefore limited in its nature. It nonetheless offers valuable insights that I'm eager to present here today. The numbers I'm about to present are taken from a survey that was conducted online between November 2019 and January 2020. So that means that the study was conducted right before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. I think that's an important point to make here.
Yes.
Also important is that the data has not been published so far and will be made available also for you to note in the upcoming weeks in a very comprehensive form. The numbers I'm going to present here today, though, are also available on the website of our Bertelsmann Stiftung in German and actual English language. So irrespective of that, if you have any questions regarding the numbers I'm presenting here, of course, don't hesitate to get in touch with me. For the sake of our study, as outlined on my presentation here, we picked 8 European focus countries and reached a sample size of 10,122 respondents from Europe. And Israel samples a total sample size of 1,073 respondents. The participants were categorized as to their gender, their age, the education, as well as their urban or rural place of living. And they range from the ages 16 to 69. We started off by asking a rather basic questions, and that was, how would you describe your level of interest in information about present-day Israel or respectively Europe? And accumulate 28% of Europeans are interested in information about Israel. Every second Israeli respondent confirms his or her interest in information about Europe. So that means while 50% of Israeli respondents actually confirmed their interest, over 60% of Europeans have only a fairly weak or no interest in information about Israel at all. Now, this rather one-sided picture trends also in the second question about the opinion towards the other country or region. Here, 61% of Israelis hold a good or very good opinion about Europe, while only 22% of the European respondents have a positive attitude towards Israel. So as we can see here, it's not only a lack of interest in Israel from the Europeans' perspective, there is also a big gap when it comes to the respective opinion about each other.
Mm-hmm. Is there a particular variation in countries? Of course, also in let's look on the Germans, where the Bertelsmann Stiftung is based.
There is some variation. Interestingly enough, for the German respondents, they are more or less within the average range. Mm-hmm. So that means there is 2 or 3 percent points off, above or below. More interesting maybe is when we look at, for example, on the Polish side of respondents. So Poland was among the countries where we have over 1,000 responses. And when you look at their level of interest, for example, about Israel, they range at about 25%. And when you look at the opinion about Israel, it ranges at about 37%. So these are the lowest rates. Interest means opinion about Israel. They have fairly poor or very poor opinion about Israel at around 37%. So the peaks we can see on the Polish side. The rest of the numbers that will be published more comprehensively in the upcoming study, is more or less within, the average range.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. It's a bit disappointing to hear that. I wonder if could it be relativizing that Europe is such a big place with many countries, and naturally is maybe of more interest for a little country like Israel than vice versa. Because for Europeans, if you will, Israel is a small country with a very special country and a special history and special relations, especially for Germans. But still, for Europe as a whole, that's a small country. So could that be, in perspective, a bit of a relativizing factor?
I think that might be true for the Israeli part of the answers, because the Israelis are obviously looking at Europe as a whole, like in total. But that is obviously not true for the other side, because Polish respondents were, answering as Polish people. German people were answering as German people, and their view on Israel is, what it is. They are not per se, or that might be, a point of discussion, but they're not per se answering as Europeans. They were asked as Germans or Polish people or French people. So that is certainly a point, I think, to make, because Europe, is a region and Israel is a country, and a rather small one. So that has to be taken definitely into consideration for some of the answers. That is correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, having said all of that, related to basically all of these questions, is the question of the source of information, obviously, because the question where people are actually getting their information from, and as a result also are basing their opinion of the mutual other on. So that is something we were asking as well, especially for the summit that has taken place here today. And here we find a gap also, but of a different sort. Europeans predominantly retrieved their information about Israel from traditional media, meaning mainly TV and to some extent also newspaper. A large majority of about 60% of the Israelis, however, get their information about Europe online, meaning either online news platforms like, for example, Ynet News or JPost, and social media. And newspaper and TV only constitute about a third of the overall responses. And we obviously don't have any information in what respect the actual source of information does influence opinion. But this is certainly an interesting point that we can discuss also in the further context of this conference here today, because I think it's very, very interesting to discuss the relation between that.
Again, it's a hint towards social media, not only, but of course, it seems to be the place to target problems or flourish mutual understandings. It's more and more the place, it seems.
Right, definitely.
Does it mean that the educational system has nothing to do with giving information?
I mean, it doesn't, but it's a complementary aspect, I guess, because more and more information happens, online or from different sources. And I mean, that's a certain point to take into consideration, I think.
Yeah.
And Dina, this is we could discuss this forever, but I think it's also a hint towards the educational system to also move to other places.
Definitely.
Like social media or modern media tools.
Yeah.
And also, especially as historians, we can say, I mean, the reflection of actually the source where information comes from is key to, interpret what information is actually being consumed. So, that plays into the hands of the school responsibility as well, I think.
Yeah.
So we continued to ask our participants about a rather more complex matter than the first couple of questions, because we asked if they think that against the background of the history of the Holocaust, Europe bears a special responsibility towards the Jewish people. And as you can see, the Israeli respondents are not surprisingly to a large extent, to 74% in agreement with the statement. but also a solid majority of 57% of Europeans support this view. And here, I think Germany is worth a special mention. Germany is sitting slightly below average at 56%. However, if we now adjust this question a bit and no longer ask European participants for responsibility towards Jewish people, but towards the state of Israel, the respondents agreeing to that, saying, yes, we have a responsibility, are dwindling to about 40% now. Now, almost as many Europeans disagree with the statement, yes, there is a responsibility, as are agreeing with it.
Oh, is there a difference of generations? Perhaps older generations would feel more that there is a responsibility for Israel. And younger generation who drifted away from World War II and the Holocaust, etc., don't feel that as much.
I mean, that's an interesting part of the question because it naturally comes to mind. I checked that for both the question of responsibility for Jews and the responsibility for Israel. And interestingly enough, I checked the people from 16 to 30. So it kind of depends, obviously, what you deem as being young. But in the question of responsibility towards Jews, there is not a significant difference. The response rate is slightly lower, the agreement rate at 53% instead of 57%. If you look at responsibility towards Israel, though, there is a difference. And the average answer to that was, in support, 42%. And if you change that to the younger generation, it's about 34%. So we have a gap of like 8 to 10%. It kind of depends on, what you define as being young. But interestingly enough, this doesn't show, at least in our numbers, in responsibility towards Jews and Judaism.
Okay.
So having said all of that, the question now, how do you interpret that? What does all of that mean? And one first conclusion would be that we can observe a rather profound gap in the mutual perception between Europeans and Israelis. And that pertains to, first of all, the interest towards one another, but also the attitude. We have also seen that while European responsibility towards Jewish people in general is at a majority, the respondents do differentiate and are not necessarily transferring their feeling of responsibility from Jews in general to Israel as the only Jewish state in the world. So a key takeaway from the survey up to this point would be that there is a profound gap in the mutual perception between Europeans and Israelis.
Again, that's kind of disappointing, but it seems to be a fact. And the question is why?
I mean, and really, I totally agree with you, Mike. That is kind of the pinnacle of, we kind of knew that before, but can we actually gather ways of, finding an explanation or even addressing this gap in perception? And interestingly enough, the data gives us some hints as to how that might be possible. Because what we also asked was, how often Europeans interact with Jewish people. And 16% of our respondents agreed. They were saying that they somewhat often or very often interact with Jewish people, while an accumulated 54% only rarely do. Now, if you correlate this question, now this is the interesting part, with the responses from the previous items we asked. So the item for interest in information or opinion about Israel, you get a really interesting pattern showing up. Because it shows that respondents that are in actual contact with Jews are more likely not only to feel more responsible for Jewish people overall, if you remember, that was the question number 3 we asked, but also for Israel as a state. That was question number 4. In addition, they also tend to be more interested in information about Israel and to have a more positive opinion about the state of Israel. So while the results of this survey are, certainly not shedding a very positive, or as Mike put it, a rather disappointing light on the current state of the perceptions between Europe and Israel, there are not only bad news, because the survey offers actual tangible advice of how to possibly attack this gap in mutual perceptions, right? So it's interaction that matters. That is one key takeaway from the numbers we were able to gather here. According to, that is what I just presented to you, is called the contact hypothesis, right? According to this, positive interaction is beneficial for more positive attitudes overall. And this is, according to our numbers, also true for the perception between Europeans and Israelis, and might play a crucial role also in combating some of the problems or aspect that, Dina, you were just laying down in your presentation. Now, what sounds like a very obvious conclusion, positive contact leads to positive opinion, is in fact not that common to be really be showing or palpable in actual data. Now, in addition to that, the findings are relevant not only for us as a Bertelsmann Stiftung. As Mike said in the introduction, we are doing exchanges and caring for the relationship between Israel and Germany, but basically for any player who engages in the realm of European-Israeli relationships. Because what does it say? We need to continue to create common positive experiences. We need to continue building structured forms of exchange and direct interaction and platforms for debate, because they are, in the end, the best way to constructively shape the mutual perception of our countries. And this might be, difficult during times of Corona. That is for sure, but it's nonetheless, very important. So that's it from my part. And, thanks for the discussion and listening.
Thank you so much, Joachim.
May I add that again, first of all, you gave us some encouragement, some ray of hope for more interaction, more knowing about each other, because much of the source of this is ignorance.
Right.
Is ignorance among the youngsters and the grown-ups. The more they know what Judaism is, what is its contribution to the world, the more we know more about Christianity, then perhaps, and about Islam, there is rampant ignorance among these three components in Europe. The more we work on that, on making each other known to each other, habits, culture, holidays, meetings, perhaps there is some hope.
I totally agree. I mean, and this is one key takeaway from the numbers I presented. Like, we shouldn't stop working, together on these aspects. I know it's gotten more difficult. And in the pre-discussion, we were, discussing, Dina, that the numbers of Jews in Europe are actually, in tendency going down. And this will get more difficult in the future. But this is also, from my perspective, a plea not only for interaction between Jewish citizens of Europe and the other citizens, but this is also an important plea for more exchange between Europeans and Israelis, like representatives of the state of Israel. And that is what we have to work for, I think.
You know that even you mentioned Poland, with a low opinion about Israel, etc. But there is a lot of high school exchanges.
Right.
The high school exchanges come back with a totally different view. Suddenly a new reality was opened, the positive one, interactional one. Yeah, definitely.
And this obviously serves to show that, exchange is not the only aspect of this. It is about political climate. It is about, knowledge in schools. And it's just one piece of the puzzle, really. But that is really beneficial to, towards the common perception and mutual relations.
I totally agree, because we know that, for example, German and Israeli relations in regards of exchange programs, in cultural exchange and cooperation is very flourishing. That's what we hear from diplomats, ambassadors, and commerce agencies, and whoever. So actually, it's there. It seems to be growing. That's what we hear, but it's obviously not enough.
That is for sure. And the longer we go away from the memories of the Holocaust, I think the more important it actually gets to keep these aspects and memories alive, and to actually tell, our citizens and children what actually happened to to keep the memory awake, really, and to, in that regard, influence the mutual perception in a positive way.
A point of interest, I have a research on how the popes, some 5 popes who visited Israel, are perceived by Israelis who saw them and how they perceive Israel, etc. And the main point is that popes who had personal contacts with a Jew, a friend, a childhood friend, a lady in the underground, etc., had more positive attitudes toward Jews in general and Israel. So
there you go.
You're right.
Thank you so much, Dina.
It seems to be a natural rule that getting used to things make or improve acceptance and tolerance and things that can we share and have in common and make the world a better place. Guys, it was very enriching. The time is running. 10 seconds I see on my watch are left for us. Again, thank you really so much to have those prestigious studies for the summit and two proven scientific oriented people, Professor Dina Porat and Dr. Joachim Rother, Tel Aviv University, Bertelsmann Stiftung in Germany, and Yad Vashem, chief historian, of course, which is a big point also in the summit. Your colleagues also gave us really enriching facts and news and findings about their work already in the summit. So thanks again.
Thank you.
And stay with us. The summit will continue. Thanks very much,
Mike.
And back to our hosts, Susanne Glass and Jenny Havemann.
Thank you.